Okie dokie. I'm going to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us today. And the biggest thank you goes to Sully Perella, who's on here with me from Schellman. Thank you very much, Sully. We are talking about privacy by design today, and it's not PCI. It's not just, oh, what's going on with the PCI 4 dot whatever it is today. I think it's still 4.0, but I'm not sure. Anyway, this is PII related and privacy overall. There's so much going on right now. Things are continuing to move. So before we get into the content itself, I would like for Sully, if you don't mind, introducing yourself to the group.
Thank you. I appreciate the warm introduction. My name is Sully Perella. I'm a technical director here at Schellman. I run the training services at Schellman and am the subject matter expert for all things encryption, digital trust, and PCI for our organization.
Thank you, Sully. And I will let everybody know Sully is my go-to person when I have questions about PCI, about PII, about what's happening today, what are people doing, what are the trends. He's the person I call. And I had a close friend 2 years ago who actually had a ransomware attack and they needed help. And I said, I know the person to get you in touch with. And Sully was really able to help them through it and really give them a sense of confidence and understanding of next steps to take. Couldn't make the ransomware go away, but certainly
That's
could
true.
help them. So I'm honored to have Sully here today speaking to all of you. I'm Deana Rich, co-founder of Infinicept. I'm also GM of Paysolve, our consulting unit. And I've been on the compliance side, on the risk fraud side of the payments card industry, of the payments industry for over 35 years now. So I've always been doing these fun and exciting things with compliance. So we're going to dive in just a second, but I want to let everybody know, please enter your questions in the chat when they come to mind. Sully and I much prefer to be able to answer your questions as they come up so that we are timely in the response. If, however, you wait until the end, we will have time at the end as well. So just letting you all know that. So with that, we are going to go ahead and start with our first slide. And Sully and I both have some interesting pieces here, but I'm going to just open before throwing it over to you, Sully, with the saddest part, which is I keep hoping for a comprehensive federal law. And I think that is silly of me. They tried it in 2022 with the American Data Privacy Protection Act, and then again in 2024 with the American Privacy Rights Act. And neither act was able to get good enough support to continue moving. So we're going to continue on with this state level governance, and things are changing there as well. Sully?
There are a lot of states that are taking action here because, in absence of a comprehensive federal law that aligns what is considered private data, it's, truly up to the states to define this themselves and align this with the state's business interests. I It is, I mean, we're going to definitely go into this in a little bit further, but this is going to be a growing issue where more and more states are deploying laws. I mean, the addition of, I think it's 13 states to this roster in the past year, the things that are currently implemented or coming in the next few months or year to be enacted is a really big deal for anybody who's wanting to do business. And to reiterate, when something that Dean said earlier, with we think about HIPAA, right? Probably, PHI is that number one thing that comes into mind when this comes up, but it's way more than that. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but it's the amount of things that could be sensitive is is really key. And I'm hoping that everybody here is kind of thinking, what do we collect and how we use it? And if you have questions, please toss those in there because we'd love to answer directly to what your concerns are.
To that end, Sully, I think that what is considered private PII,
Mhm.
personally identifiable information, is growing.
Yes.
And we will continue to talk about that, especially with one of the lawsuits out there. But I've seen where people don't think something is personally identifiable because it's out there in the public, but it doesn't mean it's not.
Okay.
So we'll continue to dive into that. And the states are also starting to work together a little more. California has led a charge with a state consortium. So when we think about this state level governance, it's hopefully there'll be some that go together, and we'll talk about that as well. So, what is personally identifiable? No, sorry, that's not the question. The question is, when I think about all the different states, yikes, when I think about all the different states out there and all the different laws in the different states, how do I know which state matters? Sully, is it
That-
where I am? What is it?
At the moment, it is where the consumer, the customer is, which means that I live in Wisconsin, so anybody who's wanting to do business with me needs to consider any laws that Wisconsin would have. Similarly, if you have a app that's available to all residents of the United States, you should presume that you're going to have to deal with states like California, Colorado, New Jersey, New York. And as Dina mentioned earlier, California is or has been the the biggest contender when people talk about privacy because it was fairly all-encompassing for we need to know what data you're collecting. You need to define how you're using it, and it cannot just be, hey, we're collecting it for something. You needed to define that purpose, which is a big deal for any kind of business who has made a lot of money off of just collecting data and then reselling that data associated with whatever application or software they were using. But in terms of data residency, this is when we talk about data residency, this is where it's stored. So if you're using a cloud, you may have something along the lines of the Northwest region or the Northeast region. And at the moment, not enough of the state laws address this. There are a number of federal concerns when you go outside of the United States, where the federal government says if you're dealing with anything that has to do with our country's best interests, or similarly with the EU, we have these concepts of if it's going to impact our country or how our country functions, then we do care about where that data resides.
So, Sully, one of the questions that has just come in, which speaks directly to this, with all the
Mhm.
different states with privacy laws, how do you prioritize your compliance efforts when you look at not only where you're storing, but where your consumers are, where your business is? How do you prioritize that?
Aligning the controls, and then applying the most stringent concepts across those controls to all of your data. And this is almost like a uh, largest common denominator, if you will, so that if I'm operating across 6 states, or maybe I'm operating across 20 states, and 7 of those have a published privacy law, then I'm going to look at those 7 and say, what do I need to do to meet this? And by applying those concepts to all of my data, I will meet the other ones. And this is, even if that concept was applied, you thought it, you're like, hey, we're good. Your organization is going to really need to stay on top of that because these laws develop, they change. There are some time-based elements to them, things that are not effective now, which will be in 6 months, 2 years. And to meet that regulatory or that legal control is going to require an ongoing effort. If I didn't answer your question, please type in a follow on there because that is in a lot of cases the question that businesses in the US are asking.
I think one of the things when I try to figure out for my own business, how do I figure this out? What privacy laws do I pay attention to?
Exactly.
I choose the most restrictive because I have clients who are in a few different states, but they have merchants who can be in any state.
Mhm.
So right now, until we get to the last slide, California is the most restrictive state, but that's starting to change. But right now, I look at California and say, okay, I know I'm going to have consumers there. It's the sixth largest economy in the world. I can't get away from having
That's right.
some consumers or clients there. So I am going to prioritize California law right now as the one I look at. And then the next question in here is, do we see state privacy laws converging towards a common standard? Or will companies have to keep managing this patchwork? And I think it's both. And there's a consortium of states led by California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Indiana, New Jersey, and Oregon, who all are working together. So that's one. But you might notice a common denominator in those states. And I think what you're going to get is some political divides where states won't work together. That's my opinion on that. And I'm going to click that we've answered this. Sully, I'm going to throw it to you in case you have other things to add to that.
I think you hit the nail on that, that there is some alignment where, and we're going to talk about Maryland here. I'm just going to throw it out as a teaser, but Maryland is definitely throwing a monkey wrench in that concept. Uh, a comparatively small state in terms of population, but definitely, smack dab in the middle of the East Coast. You got DC. I mean, all those states are so close together. And if we're thinking about data residency on the East Coast, uh, good luck trying to pinpoint, somebody down to a specific state. I think as each state in where I see this going, I think we're going to see the states start to keep on creating these individual laws, and then eventually businesses are going to demand that the federal government create some sort of comprehensive single focus so that they don't have to think, oh, do I need a lawyer for this state? Do I need to think about this new state coming up? How is this going to change? And then in doing so, they can uh, from a business perspective, proactively engage with legislators to direct that in a way that allows them to continue to do business in the way they want to.
Thank you. And before we leave this slide, I'm just going to point out the data mapping essentials that is on this slide. This is going to come up in later slides when we talk about policies. But you really need to know all the data you store, where you store it, be able to map it. I've seen where people know they're storing first and last name, but they don't realize until they get it mapped, they've actually stored it in more than one location. And yes, Sully.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. Data storage is an interesting one because we know while laws may not apply at the moment and within the United States to where that data is stored, it has to be considered because that is how data is handled. And that data handled is where data can bleed into other services. With the cloud environments, the most, a cloud is just a server farm, right? Which is fine in and of itself, right? That makes sense. When companies start deploying architectures that scale up and down based on demand, knowing how that data is handled as multiple systems scale up, as your database cluster or data repository grows, shrinks, it's the ability to truly define the bounds of data exposure become increasingly difficult. And it is going to take someone, or people rather, teams, the people who are doing this on your organization, to scrutinize those functions to say, yeah, we have really good bounds on this, or more likely, we've got good ideas for 80-90% of this, but we are going to need to put a fine-tooth comb over the rest of this to understand what's going on. And that's a concerning statement to make.
Only knowing 80% and having to figure out the 20, which
That's right. That's right.
lead us into the compliance requirements here, Sully. I think There's a lot going on this slide, even though there's very few words. There's a lot you have to know. Sully?
So if you wouldn't go to the doctor's office and then be very comfortable if the person who saw you said, I'm about to be a medical doctor. You want to know that the person is already a doctor. Similarly, when you are doing banking, you want to know that the people who are handling your banking information, be it credit card, be it any of the natural rules for exchange of payment information, all of that's going to be there and built. It's tested, it's verified, which makes you feel comfortable as the business consumer. So this is when collecting this data, those concepts must be understood for like, if I am going to be providing a service, I need to know what that service is. And even if I'm doing troubleshooting, what does this app do? What metrics do I get back so that I can continue to provide a quality service or product? I need to have that understood. And then if it hits any particular check marks, and this is where the third party review comes in, if I have enough of a volume, if business interests demand it, then I need to have a third party. I can't just self-report and say, I'm doing this right. I need to have a third party come in and perform an evaluation. This is where companies like Infinicept may really come in and say, hey, we can help you put bounds on how this is being handled and the operations for that. And then if something goes wrong, what do you do? At what level do you need to notify somebody? If you have an employee who walks off with a laptop and that laptop had customer information on it, do you have to worry yet? And these issues need to be understood before that laptop goes missing. And then last, for usage transparency, uh, you can't just, and this aligns so much with what I was saying about California before. If you're collecting data, what are you doing with it? And why do you have it? And that disclosure can seem in a lot of ways like a confining element that prevents, businesses will say this is preventing innovation. But in a lot of ways, this is how I would suggest organizations take the security controls that they are applying or will be applying and use them as marketing. This is where you can provide the assurances to your customers that you are a responsible company to do business with.
One of the ways that you can provide that assurance to your business partners, if not your consumers directly, you can't always help them with this, but to your business partners who will look at you, maybe a bank is a partner, so they'll ask for your policies and procedures, or a third party that you're working with will want to know that you know what's happening in your environment. So you need to have good policies and procedures. That's not necessarily one document. The policies will be more your higher level document explaining your risk-taking tolerance, what you will collect, not the detail of it, but yes, we collect PII and we promise to keep it safe. And we promise to review our safety measures every 6 months. Whatever that will be, that's more in the policy doc that goes to the higher level executive, sometimes even the board. What really becomes important is, what do your procedures say? There's a bunch of different pieces there. You've got one, what data do you store? And you need to know what you store. Where do you store that data? You need to know where you store that data. Again, you might think you're only storing it in one data table, but you had an engineer at one point that duplicated that data table to test something and they never removed it. Well,
That's right.
you not knowing that you have those test environments and not taking care of them in your policy, in your procedures, can put you at a disadvantage, because you might get hacked and they're going to hit that because that's not protected, that dev or that test environment, that dev environment rather than production. Sully, it looked like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, there usually is.
Please.
I think there's something here I want to throw that will turn the tables on its head a little bit. Most companies, when they see some sort of control, they're like, okay, I got to do this thing to meet this regulation, this framework. So now I'm going to create a policy. And then from that policy, I'm going to make procedures
Mhm.
and I'm going to tell people what to do. Well, your company has been running for a while now. These procedures exist. And what I strongly recommend is you go to the people who are doing the work and you say, one, what are you doing with this data? So now you have like, in data discovery, data management is a, we could talk for weeks on this because it would be hard to really get your hands around. But you talk to those people and say, how are we handling this data? And are these procedures comprehensive of that? And then if so, then you say, okay, what policies do we have that reflect these procedures in place? And if the appropriate controls are in place, then great. Document what you're doing in your policies. And then that's going to say the when you go through some sort of third party audit that what you said you do you can demonstrate is being done, and that's backed by your policies, your procedures, and then you're going to meet that framework instead of going to a dev team and saying you need to do it this way. Because if you've for anybody here who's ever had that given that direction to anybody, it typically doesn't go over so well because you're like, wait a second, I've got a whole team here. We've been doing it this other way, and we may not be doing it your way, but we are doing it in a way that complies. And then I guess it's a better way to say, listen to the people who are doing the work and then work with them to have that meet a policy and have policy reflect procedures.
You know, it's one of the, I love cliches, and one of the cliches is there are 100 ways to do something and 98 of them are correct. And not dictating to a group that's been in
Yeah,
existence how to do something will go miles, and it will get you to a safer environment because you will listen to what they are doing.
that's right.
You might even find gaps in what they're doing, and great, then you all work together to shore up those gaps. But you might find things that you didn't even know were super strong, the way they've put in different methods to protect the data is stronger than you even imagined. And it didn't take extra work or vendors or anything. It just what took some really smart people who are already in your company, already doing smart things. So, yes.
Do- I want to, that is such a great statement. And getting the people who are doing the work to explain. This, I think, answers the questions. How do companies document and communicate their procedures for collecting, storing, and processing data? Trace, trace that data. All of this is going to have some sort of transaction log. And this is going through this the very first time is going to be eye-opening. And the benefit of it is that once you go through this with one data thread, a second, a third, it does get easier, and you're going to start to realize that you're encompassing more and more of the data sets. We're going to talk about metadata here in a minute, so I don't want to cut that off, but it is, as Deana and I said before, this is difficult to understand how data can bleed. And it's going to take a lot of diligence and patience to just slow down instead of looking at that data flow diagram and being like, we're good, because that is so rarely the case.
Um, so I hope that question was answered. It was for me. So thank you, Sully. And the last thing I'm going to say about policies is, and procedures are, don't have documents you don't follow. This sounds like a really light thing to say, but should you get audited and should you have a policy or a procedure that sounds really good, but that you don't follow, that is worse than not having it at all. So you really need to make sure you understand your data lifecycle, you understand what's there, you understand how you're protecting it, and then you document it, not that you write some policy that sounds really keen and that you're not doing it that way.
That's right.
So with that, I'm going to go to the next page because this is privacy by design and building it properly. Sully?
For anybody who's, I think in the past 20 years, we've really started to hear terms like DevOps and then SecDevOps. This concept is truly no different. Development and operations were combined because you had development working on patch systems, and then they're wanting to promote code to production and it doesn't run right, and then you've got this mismatch between what your operations are doing and what your dev is trying to push. So then they think, okay, we can combine these concepts. I know you want to deploy this code into production, so how do we get you everything you need at the beginning? And at that point, what you need are patching, hardening, baselines applied to those systems and that software stack. And this makes sense. Then SecDevOps comes in and they're like, or security comes in and says, we want to be a part of this too, because you can't just expose all of these services to everything. You need to think about access controls and you need to think about the life cycle of this system. And how are we logging all of the things we need to determine that something is wrong? And then they're like, okay, well, we got to fit this in there. And then, maybe it's DevSecOps. I'm not going to have that debate, but you get these considerations for how to maintain a system code in a secure manner from the get-go. And if your organization is doing that, I got great news. Adding privacy to the mix is probably already somewhat of a consideration. Because when you throw in security, the security is saying, what data do you have? Who should have access to it? Who's the data owner? Where is it flowing to? Does this need to interact with anybody along this chain? And at the beginning of this process where you're architecting it, is you can say, I need to have these considerations that include privacy controls so that if I know that I'm interacting with new states or I need to apply the most strict controls for the states in which my software operates, or rather where the consumers of my software operate, then I can put that in at the very beginning. And then you go through and you're like, okay, we have this concept, you build it, you test it, you deploy it, and then now I've got an upkeep. Now I need to keep that alive. And that maintenance is beyond just patching systems. It's how do we learn what's going on in that production environment and then prevent that issue from, kicking us again? How do we meet the changing concerns of privacy at the beginning of this cycle so that when we push to production, it's already meeting these controls instead of applying it like a band-aid? I know I kind of
Thank
went
you.
on.
I think this, along with the answer just a moment ago, really answers that question that was asked about communicating procedures, collecting, storing, and processing data. This a lot speaks to that. So thank you. So who's responsible for all of this, right? So we've talked about what should be done. Who in your organization should do it? Is it, I don't know, is it Sully? Is it me? Well, we're not in your organization, so that's not going to help. But within your organization, even if you don't have developers who would be high enough or in the leadership team to take care of this, you do want to look to your leadership teams to set a tone for how you feel about privacy, how you feel about ensuring your data is safe. They set that tone, and they will then bring in that compliance team that can help, whether it's external or internal. And you have to be accountable. So once you have your policies for how it works, if you don't hold your people accountable, well, then that's not going to help. The next piece, the data breaches can sink companies. I was talking to Sully before this about while not a breach, a class action, which if you hear some of my attorney friends speak in the industry, they say that class action suits are one of the things that we're not paying close enough attention to because they too can sink a company. There is a company called Clearview AI who went online and they gathered all of the information, all of the pictures on the internet of people, faces, facial recognition, and said, oh, look, there's a picture. This will be on the internet. That's Deana Rich. This is her picture. And I'm moving and there's a lot going on here. So they take that and then they use it with law enforcement and they sell it. And that's actually PII, right? My face, my gestures, identifying me by this, it's PII. You cannot sell that without my permission. Huge class action suit, almost $52 million settlement was reached. Odd settlement. Sully and I are trying to figure this one out earlier. In that, the settlement is that the class participants are going to get stock in this company because it would have shut them down to make them pay it out in money. So now they have stock, and we'll see what happens. But with that, but I think the point is so much more is PII. Leadership has to set the tone. Don't just do things because it seems cool. Make sure you understand what you're doing. You get good opinions on what is PII, what's not, what you're allowed to use, and what you're allowed to sell, because class actions and data breaches can sink companies. And then how do you implement that? Sully, I was going to throw it over to you.
Well, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, having a top-down approach, because the people who are doing this are going to need the time and resources to do it. Like this has to be a concerted, directed, and dedicated effort by the staff doing this. The metadata you spoke about, or rather the data you spoke about, are the common ones. Metadata, which is a really broad-based term that says like everything else, includes a lot of data that most states, to some degree, consider private. This can be your geolocation, which can also be your IP address. It can be your browsing history. It can be your device ID. Whenever your phone reaches out and it says, here I am, this is who I am. Well, that's your phone's ID, but there's a lot of ways to correlate that to me, the user, to somebody else. And that is in many states is considered privacy data. So if all of these things, just by the nature of their current build, are collecting these data elements, okay, how are we protecting it? How do we identify what is accessing these data repositories? And then having management come in and say, we need to really know what's going in. Like we need to know what's going on and we need to know what we're doing about it right now. Because then you can say, maybe we're not meeting all of these controls as we thought. Maybe we are not meeting all of these controls as we must. And you can come up with a comprehensive plan to do that. But without knowing what you're working with and without management saying, this is a big, big deal to us because negligence is not an excuse in law, that's where you have to go with it. It's hard. I'm not trying to paint this as anything other than difficult. The flip side is it is incredibly worth it because if we were looking for the rosiest way to look at this, I just got done working with a company. We were doing some training about how they were handling data. And they were saying, well, we've got these antiquated systems, we've got these legacy systems that we're supporting, which we can't meet these controls. And I flat out said, how much business do you do with them? And they gave me I mean, it's not nothing to scoff at, but not at all their largest business segment. And I said, what if you were to just ship them your newest devices and charge them some nominal fee for it? You're not trying to profit, you're just breaking even. And do you think they'd go for it? And they were like, well, yeah, probably. And I said, well, then you just solved this problem. Like, You get your customers up to date. They feel like you're doing them a solid. You don't have to have all of this legacy stuff that you can't support. Your environment concept, your not concept, your environment implementation shrinks. And this is where involving the people who are doing the work is your chance to say, all right, we're doing it this way. Before we just try protecting this data, if you could start over, what would you do to meet these controls, to consider privacy and security at the get-go? And then you may just end up with a far more efficient operating business structure. Again, work, but there's a lot of money and savings down that path, which is how a lot of people can define that ROI.
I think you've said it more than once, and I want to just double down on working with the people in your company that do the job, that are responsible for what's happening. You at the leadership level are setting the tone, and then you're working with the people that understand it from a day in and day out perspective and can ensure that they're implementing that compliance tone or data protection tone that you want to set. Have to work with those people.
Yes.
Which leads us right to our takeaways. We start with mapping your data and knowing what you have and where it lives. And that starts with the people. And it starts with understanding what data you have, the metadata you just spoke of, that people don't think about or remember is PII. Again, the pinging of the cell tower or the geolocation, the MAC address on your computer. Those identify you, and anytime they identify you, it can be considered PII depending on the state you're talking about, the regulator you're talking about, how you're using it. So you need to know and then judge it. Is it, isn't it? So know all the pieces of data, mapping it. The next takeaway I'm going to throw over to you because we learned.
Yeah, this is new for us. Uh, I didn't understand it. Just, I mean, this when Deana and I built this slide deck, she and I have both been talking about California or Colorado setting that bar highest for so long. Well, now Maryland's coming into play, and the uh, this is definitely going to redefine what is considered strict because even if consumers acknowledge that they are going to be giving up this information, in a lot of ways, it can't be sold past a certain limitation date. I mean, I don't have the law in front of me to quote it, but it is far more restrictive in terms of you cannot by default record things. If you have things, you have to have a lifespan of that data. You have to know what you're doing with that data. And then, as I understand it at this point, you can't, even if they acknowledge, hey, you're going to be collecting this from me, you can't just sell it forever. There's limitations, and these limitations are unique where to something that you're not seeing in Colorado or California. That is that's a really, really notable shift.
It is. We're used to the right to be forgotten. So the consumer can call and say, get rid of my data, unless, of course, you need it for risk purposes or fraud purposes or protection purposes. But now you also have to say, okay, not only does somebody have a right to be forgotten, but I don't have the right to use it past a certain amount of time. And I, in the past, would always use it. And it was just something, and I would mark it and mark it and mark it and mark it. And now I can't because I can't continue to use it. So I don't have any of the details, or I don't have good enough details to debate it, but it is more restrictive. And I highly recommend that you all pay attention to what's happening in Maryland. And that can be where the consumer is, it can be where you are, it can be where your servers are, the cloud. What region are you in? And maybe you have a backup cloud region. And you say, I'm not doing business with Maryland. Well, pay attention to where your cloud storage is. So think about that. And that leads us into designing for privacy as a takeaway. Your product people should work with your risk people. Sully?
Yeah, collaboration here. Yeah, And knowing what third parties, there's no organization, no enterprise organization I know of that has everything in-house. Something is always hosted, something's contracted, something's supported. These third parties often have access to data repositories, and maybe they're not accessing the data, but can they change how that data is being handled? Uh, and this comes into how we tag data, if you will. If you were to step into a room of 10 people and you were to say, each of you give me one or two words, 10 single or double words about yourselves that describe who you are. You know, there might be some people who say, my name's Joe. I am a female. I live in Wisconsin, or whatever words that they're using. If you were to go across all 10, they're not going to say the same things. There might be some people who identify, eye color or something about them, how many kids they have, but it's not going to be the same. And how we take that unstructured data and we put a box around it is how we tag it to make it useful so that I can say, oh, uh, Sharon, you have two cars. That's fantastic. Whatever. But the knowing how that data is handled, who has access to it, how we tag it is also how we identify the sensitivity of it and say, these elements here, Sharon having two cars, not that big of a deal. Joe having three kids named, you know, uh, Carol, Mark, and Joe, probably something that we need to think about is maybe being sensitive. And now you start to get this picture of, I don't know, and yes, it's sensitive or not. That understanding has to be done at the very beginning or in retrospect. Hey, we've been collecting this for a long time. We're not really sure all of the things we have. Okay, no judgment. This isn't the time to cast blame. What do we have? How are we using it? Who accesses it? And are we sharing this with anybody? And then by honestly taking a look at that, you can say, all right, now that we know what we're working with, we can incorporate the controls we need to. We can apply these concepts so that we prevent, or rather mitigate, lessen the chances of exposure.
So knowing what you have and designing how you store it and how you use it for that privacy understanding. And applying the strictest standards is probably the safest, but at the very least, understand what you are or aren't doing as it relates and where you might get in trouble.
That's right.
As I look back on what you just said. And the last piece here is executive ownership, which goes to the question in the question and answer, which is, how can I help my leadership team understand the reputational risk of neglecting data privacy without creating fear? I think, unfortunately, there has to be a bit of fear in here because executive leadership isn't built to be at one with compliance. I am, and I happen to have been one of the founders of this company. So yeah, our executive leadership has a good handle on compliance, but I find I'm fighting an uphill battle with the other members of my executive leadership team because I am more of a sole person on wanting to design for privacy and seeing the data and sometimes getting excited about designing for privacy. And what I do have to do is bring in like this Clearview lawsuit, or I bring in, there's other lawsuits. I looked down because I printed out a whole bunch in case we had time to go over them. There's an Allstate lawsuit that just settled against Allstate. There's a Google settlement for how they were doing some things. There's the state consortium now. So you do have to make sure the executive team understands the risks. And sometimes as you're explaining risks, they may become fearful. And that's not the goal of explaining risk. It's you can't make a good decision. Do I stop at this stop sign? Do I not stop at this stop sign? Every stop sign has different risks. If it's 3 a.m. in a residential area that's always quiet, not stopping at that has a much smaller risk, still has a risk, but a much smaller risk than a five-way stop sign in the middle of the day that always has cars lined up. And if you just go through that one, you have a higher risk of getting hit. So you have to be able to explain that risk level with different decisions.
Uh, yeah, I think you've answered this question that just came up, but it's too often. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you're running a business, all you're looking at is that bottom line. What's my ROI on this thing? And when it comes to data leaks, data exposure, the immediate place that everyone wants to go to are the fines. What, and that is, obviously a big deal. That does not necessarily include legal costs to keep those fines less. What a lot of people don't account for, almost all of these include some sort of post-event demonstration that controls are not applied. And which means that the things that you should have been doing before, now you're going to have to demonstrate it in a shortened time frame where the ability to think dynamically and okay, how can we bring ourselves into the year 2025? How can we do this in a way that is somewhat organic with this new business initiative we have? This is where what is it, uh, ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure. I think
Yes.
I got that backwards. Yeah, right. But
Yes.
you get the idea. Like it's worth it. And it's hard to quantify, but it's so valuable when you see organizations embracing privacy and security as a part of who they want to be. And then they do, and then they can go to their customers and say, we're doing this right, and this is how. And you can state exactly with transparency how you're meeting these controls, what your company is proactively doing, and then it gives you that differentiator in the market because you are saying, we're upfront with how we're handling your data, and we care about you as a customer. And there's definitely ROI there.
There really is. And as time goes on with more information out there and more information being used, and we didn't even touch on AI, and nor do I want to in this discussion. I think that's a whole other session. But being able to give your clients confidence that your executive leadership has that thought of compliance and that culture of compliance really gives them confidence, and they'll stay with you. You might even be able to overcome some hiccups in your product or something that happened because you've got this other piece, this culture of compliance that is making your consumer clients feel more comfortable.
True, very true.
So map your data, apply the strictest standards, design for privacy, and this has to have executive ownership, and it has to be from the top down. Those are the takeaways from today.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for leading this discussion. It's really valuable.
Well, Sully, thank you for taking the time to share your expertise. There's so much more there. Every time we talk, I learned. So I recommend that anybody reach out to Sully. His information is right here on the screen. So thank you all very much. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.